All right, we're live. So hello and good afternoon and early evening, everyone. I'm Tosca Lee, and I am one of the Rogue Women Writers. We are a group of 10 thriller writers whose backgrounds range from intelligence officer to journalism to crime scene analysts to special investigators, hostage negotiators to psychotherapists to international consultants to White House strategists. A quick orientation for everybody who's joined us. There's a chat room on the side of the screen if you're on Zoom with us. And if you click that chat icon, you can leave a question or comment in there. So participants and special guests, I would like to invite you to go ahead and introduce yourself with a quick comment in the chat bar if you like. If you're joining us on Facebook Live, please be sure to say hello and leave a comment if you have anything you'd like to tell the authors. And especially if you have a question you'd like to ask. We'll do our very best to try to accommodate them all. So tonight we're in for a big treat, as the authors will be, most of them I believe will be reading from their newest work, yay, sharing a few of their favorite treats and maybe even a few behind the scenes secrets. All of the books discussed here tonight should be available through your local bookstore. Please be sure to grab or order a copy and support your local booksellers. And also check our guests' previous work as well, because there's some great stories and books there and series as well. Tonight, we also have a special giveaway. We have two books that we're giving away, Alex Kava's Fallen Creed and J.D. Barker's Death of the Black Widow, written with James Patterson. Winners are chosen from our registered attendees and will be notified a few days after our event via email. So keep your eyes on your inboxes for that. So as I said, my name is Tosca Lee. I'm an author of 11 novels. I'm coming to you today from the Nebraska countryside, and you may see Timber wandering in and out of the picture. He's my giant German Shepherd, and I'm thrilled to be emceeing this event. So in no particular order, we're going to introduce our four authors and then come back to each for their reading and or discussion of their latest books. We'll have some questions for them. And at the end, we'll do some round robin style interviewing. If you have questions for our authors, please feel free to post them at any time. They will be monitored and relayed to the authors in case I miss them. So please feel free to do that. All right, let's begin with Alex Kava. Alex Kava writes thrillers that combine facts with fiction. Her canine handler, Ryder Creed, rescues abandoned dogs and turns them into scent heroes. Kava is the New York Times, US Today, and Amazon best-selling author of 21 novels. She's been awarded 2 Nebraska Book Awards, a Florida Book Award, and the Marie Sandoz Award. Published in 32 countries, her novels have sold over 6 million copies. When she's not writing, Alex enjoys spending time with her pack of Westies, none of which are as well trained as Ryder Creed's dogs. So welcome, Alex.
Thanks.
And tonight we're going to be talking, do you have your book handy? We're going to be talking about Fallen Creed. All right, I'm going to give you a chance to talk about that book in just a moment. We have also joining us tonight, J.D. Barker. J.D. Barker is the New York Times and international best-selling author of numerous novels, including A Caller's Game and The Fourth Monkey. His latest, Death of the Black Widow, is co-authored with James Patterson, and it releases April 19th. That's tomorrow, isn't it?
Yeah.
Wow. So yay, there it is. I'm so glad you could make it with that release coming out. His books have been translated into 24 languages, sold in more than 150 countries, an option for film and television. JD resides in coastal New Hampshire with his wife, Dana, and their daughter, Ember. How old is Ember now, JD?
She is 4 going on 20.
Aww.
She's starting kindergarten in a couple of months. So it's
wonderful.
Larry, we've got the countdown going on.
Okay. All right. And we will be coming back to talk about Death of the Black Widow in just a second. So next up, we have Erica Ferencik. Award-winning novelist Erica Ferencik has received glowing critical praise for her literary thrillers featuring women who face extreme physical challenges in nature, even as they grapple with internal struggles. Erica spent weeks in the wilderness of northern Maine as research for her debut novel, The River at Night. For Into the Jungle, Erica journeyed 100 miles up the Amazon to experience firsthand the lush and perilous Peruvian jungle. Now inspired and informed by a month-long trip to Greenland, Erica has set indie next pick Girl in Ice in one of the most unforgiving, unforgettable landscapes imaginable. And we see Girl in Ice right there in Erica's background. So hi, Erica. Thank you for joining us.
Great to be here. Thank you so much for having me.
And I can't wait to ask you a little bit more about these trips that you've taken.
Sure.
So we will be coming back to that. And last but not least, we have Grace D. Lee, who grew up in Houston, Texas, and is a graduate of Duke University, where she studied biology and creative writing. She currently attends medical school. I think you're about to start your third year. Is that correct? Of medical school?
Yep. Wow.
Medical school at Stanford University. Portrait of a Thief is her debut novel, and I believe it was an instant New York Times bestseller as well.
As of last week. So all of this
As of last
is
week.
very new and very
Great.
recent for me. So I'm glad to be here.
Congratulations. And also it's been optioned by Netflix as well. So very exciting. So, all right, we will have many questions to ask Grace, especially how she's doing all this at the same time as going to medical school. So we will be coming back to Grace in just a moment. So let me quickly move on to one of my personal favorite features of Rogue Reads, which is food and drink. We always ask our guests to share their own or their main character's favorite drink or snack. So Alex, canine handler Ryder Creed, who is the star of Alex Kava's Ryder Creed series, always has a thermos of coffee. FBI agent Maggie Odell drinks Diet Pepsi. And in Nebraska, they stop for Runzas. What is a Runza, you ask? Well, I don't know what happened to the other half of this Runza. A Runza is a pocket of doughy goodness filled with beef and cabbage. So that's what it is. And I happened to pick Runza up and take it out to my husband today for lunch.
There you go.
All right. So Alex lives in Nebraska. So you, Runza is a Nebraska thing, and they serve them at football games. We grew up getting served Runzas in school even. They're delicious. So enough about Runzas. Alex, tell us about Fallen Creed.
Well, a funny thing about Runzas, before we leave that, one of my editors, probably, I think it was one of the first Creed books, the first time that he came to Nebraska, I had them stopping for Runzas, and my editor said, "We can't have a Runza. Nobody knows what that is." I'm thinking, no, we can describe what it is in a sentence, but she made me cut it out of the book, so we had to stop at McDonald's or something. But now I'm very proud to use Runza in all of them. But yeah, so Fallen Creed is my latest novel.
Fallen Creed is your latest one, and it's number 7.
It is number 7. Yes.
In the Ryder
yes.
Creed series.
Yes.
And can you tell us a little bit about the story and just catch us up a little bit with where this is starting and give us an overview of the book?
Sure. Ryder Creed is a former Marine canine handler who now owns his own business of taking, and actually he's different than a lot of other businesses, and they don't use the standard dogs that are usually used for scent. He rescues abandoned dogs and he turns them into scent heroes. So he takes them off the streets. A lot of people leave them at the end of his long driveway. And his main dog that he uses is Grace, who's a little scrappy Jack Russell Terrier. And the series pretty much follows him as he, uses his dogs to follow different different cases. And that's what's been kind of interesting about this whole series is that the dogs scent, they smell different things. So it's not just cadaver dogs. It's not just finding missing people. In one of my books, I used them to have to scent a virus, which was a little bit kind of pre-pandemic. They were looking for the bird flu instead of coronavirus or something like that. So it follows Ryder Creed as a canine handler. And then I also have an FBI profiler who usually gets involved in the cases so that I have somebody who's doing the investigative side, because Ryder is not an investigator. And this is book number 7. And I do bring him back to Nebraska. They start out with, they find pieces of a body in a roadside ditch. And they end up having to look for another woman who is missing. And they're afraid that they need to find her before she ends up in the same way as the first body that they found. So it's very much Nebraska, in that there's an early blizzard in October that happens and sort of takes them entirely out of their element. Ryder and Grace end up, as I like to say, the trackers become the trapped, and it takes a whole different twist to them not necessarily being able to look for the missing person. They become the missing people. Well, of course, I consider dogs people, so sorry about that.
No need to apologize at all. In fact, I have a few questions to ask about that unique bond between handler and dog, but we're going to wait on that for a moment. Alex, are you willing to read a couple pages?
Oh, sure.
Okay.
Would you like me to do that now?
Yeah, if you would, that'd be great.
Well, this is when he first agrees to look for the missing woman. And they start out at the farmhouse that she was staying at. So they have to be able to follow her scent from where she was living. Creed expected this search to be short. It quickly became a reminder of why it was better if handlers knew very little about the victim or the investigation. Human suppositions, preconceived notions, and expectations were all too easy to insert and influence a scent dog. Just because Creed knew Libby Holmes had disappeared without a word or without her vehicle, he had already anticipated she had to have left with someone else. No way the woman simply walked these gravel roads and expected to get somewhere. That was what he presumed had happened, but Grace didn't take him down the driveway. She didn't head toward the road at all. Instead, she immediately took off in the opposite direction, toward a cornfield. Not just a cornfield, but what looked like miles and miles of field. Halfway there, she stopped and circled around. Even then, Creed still believed she might simply choose a different path that would lead to the road. Nope. She poked at the air and waved her nose up and down. She surprised him again and started loping toward the barn. The whole time Creed followed, he avoided looking over his shoulder to locate the gravel road and calculate a route. Then it occurred to him, was it possible someone met her out in the barn? Maybe they didn't want to be seen by anybody driving by. They could have pulled their vehicle into the breezeway. The huge doors were slit open, and Creed could easily see the space was empty now. That could explain why Grace might track Libby to the barn, but not to the driveway. Her scent would have ended as soon as she climbed into a vehicle waiting inside the barn. But Creed was wrong again. Instead of trotting into the breezeway, Grace darted around back and headed behind the barn. She weaved through the opening of a fenced area, the wooden gate left hanging on one single hinge. The section, about 50 feet squared, looked like it had used to be a garden, a vegetable garden, now gone to seed. Dried stalks poked up out of the weeds, fallen leaves from more than one season stuck to the bottom of the wire fence. In several places, the wire had rusted and come loose from support posts. A flash of purple caught Creed's eyes. He stepped carefully until he was close enough to identify it. A woman's scarf was tied around the top of a post. The soft material waved in the breeze, very much out of place in this deserted garden. Creed glanced around to find Grace waiting patiently. She stood next to a dip in the soil where the weeds had recently only sprouted again. They grew much shorter than the rest of the area. She looked up at him and met his eyes. She alerted, but she wasn't alerting to what Creed had asked her to find. There was something else here. There was something or someone buried here.
Dun, dun, dun. I love it. Thank you so much. So we have questions, but we're going to round back and ask those after we go on.
Sounds good.
To now, JD. And by the way, these recipes are on the Rogue Women Writers website. So if you don't live near Runza, they do ship actually. You can buy them and they'll ship them to you, but there's a recipe to make your own. And there's some recipes for various variations on this drink that is JD's favorite, which is a White Russian. Mm-hmm.
Which I'm not drinking now. I've got water. So if there was some
You've
way
got
to
water. You don't have the post.
It would have been fine. It would have been fine.
Yeah, Zoom hasn't figured out how to pass the alcohol through the screen yet.
That's right. So if you'd like to see some of those recipes, they're on the site. Now, for JD, would you like to read a couple pages or would you like to share a couple stories about writing with the notorious JP?
Yeah, here's the thing. Like when I first started doing book tours and going to bookstores and talking in front of crowds, I used to read out of the book. And then I was at one, it was in Chicago, and this little old lady came up to me and she's like, I waited all this time and I can read the book at home. I would much rather hear from you. And I got thinking about it, and every time I went to see a writer, that was kind of my general thought. I can read the book, but I want to hear about it. So I don't do readings anymore unless somebody really twists my arm. And I'm a terrible reader because I talk way too fast. I can't do all the voices. My 4-year-old will tell you that I suck at reading books. So yeah, we're not going to go there. So I can answer a couple questions, or I can tell
us a story then. Tell us a story for now tell us a little bit about what that's like, how that's happening. How did you begin writing with James Patterson?
Sure.
Give us the lowdown.
We've got this very weird history. So I sent a copy of The Fourth Monkey, which was my debut thriller, to Patterson, hoping to get a blurb for the back of the cover. We sent off so many of those to pretty much every name that you could think of, the people you want to see on your books. And I was sitting at my desk working one day, and a phone call came in, and it was a Florida area code, and I'm from Florida. So I picked it up, and this gruff voice comes on the line, and he goes, "Hey, it's Jim Patterson. You got a second?" And I'm like, "It's not James Patterson. It's one of my buddies pranking me or something like that." So I'm going through my mental Rolodex trying to figure out who it could be. But this guy starts talking, and he starts giving me his review of the book, on a phone call, without me saying a word. He just comes, he got about 20, 30 seconds into it. I'm like, what? This might actually really be him. So we talked for probably about 30, 40 minutes. And I told him when I was going to be in Florida next, and we made some plans to get together just to kind of chat. So I went to Palm Beach about 3-4 weeks later, and we met for lunch. And we were basically throwing ideas back and forth to create a project together. He's got a marketing background, for those of you that don't know this, but he started off in advertising, long before he started writing books. He wrote the Toys R Us theme song, of all things. So he had been in that world for a long time. And even though he has all these books out there, his head is still very much in marketing. He's always looking for, what can I do next that nobody would expect? Who can I work with? And that's evident by, he's worked with Bill Clinton. He's got the #1 New York Times bestseller right now, I think, with Dolly Parton. When he first told me he was going to work with Dolly Parton, I was like, what? And I was like, oh, okay. Because he understood from a marketing standpoint that book was going to sell itself. So I showed up for this lunch. He had a folder on me, no kidding, about this thick, more information on me than I know about me. And he started going into my history. I used to work as a book doctor and a ghostwriter. He went into some of that. I had 6 different books that I had written before that hit the New York Times bestseller list, all with other people's names on the cover. All of those had NDAs, and he knew what each of one of those were. So he did some serious research. But we kind of came to a stalemate because Patterson is notorious for using an outline, and I have never used an outline. I hate writing books with outlines. So we kind of left that meeting thinking we're not going to be able to do this because he wanted to do it this way, and I kind of wanted to do it this way, and my own career was going good, so I didn't really have to do this anymore. So probably about 3-4 months went by, and he called me up and he said, you know what, I think I can do this one without an outline. Let's try it and see what happens. So our first book together was called Coast to Coast Murders, and we literally went back and forth chapter by chapter. But here's the thing, if any of you ever taken Patterson's his master's class online where he teaches you how to write, so working with Jim is very much like taking that class, except for when you turn in your pages, he calls you and tells you everything that you did wrong. And he's usually right about that. You know, you hang up the phone, lick your wounds a little bit, and you realize the guy actually understands what he's doing, so you take that advice. But with Coast to Coast, I remember there's a chapter very early on in the book, and it's something that appears in pretty much every police procedural. We've got our good guy, and he's sitting in a police interrogation room. He just got completely grilled by the police detective, and he's sitting there with his attorney, and his attorney is telling him how bad this is going to be for him. The attorney gets up from the table, and he knocks on the door to leave the room. All information that had to be in the book, it was very important that it was there. But I sent him that scene after writing it, and he added one more paragraph to it and sent me back. And in his paragraph, the lawyer gets up from the table, knocks on the door, a police officer opens the door, his lawyer grabs him by the shirt collar, takes his head, bashes it against the wall, kills him, then turns to the client and said, okay, let's go. So then he hands it back to me. He said, okay, now it's your turn. Write the next chapter. So I wrote what I felt was, this impossible corner. I thought I'm going to paint James Patterson into a corner and make it impossible for him to get out. It took him about a half hour to write the scene after that and come back to me with something even better. So the entire book was the two of us just trying to one-up each other. When we finished that, and that one hit the number 2 spot on the New York Times list, which was awesome. But when we finished it, he said, okay, now we're going to try doing one my way. And he sent me an outline. And we wrote a second book called The Noise, which, working with an outline for the first time, it actually, I understood what he was talking about. A lot less words hit the cutting room floor. I tend to overwrite, like every one of my books ends up around 200,000 words, and I take like 50 to 60 out or get it down to like 120 or 130. So it's almost like taking the fat off a steak. I just kind of keep trimming at it until I feel that it's as lean as it can get. But working with him with an outline, we basically went from page 1 to the last page, and there was very little work that had to happen in the middle. So I saw the benefits of that. And I kind of thought we were done at that point, but he came back to me and with the idea for Death of the Black Widow. And this was really crazy because it was basically the height of the Me Too movement. This was on every network news channel. Everybody was talking about it. He calls me up and says, you know what? I want to write a book about a succubus. Are you in? And I'm like, right now, do you watch the news? It's probably not a good time. And he explained how he was going to tie the supernatural element of a succubus to a black widow, which is a female serial killer, and kind of bring it all into modern times. And again, the guy is, I've given up trying to understand how he comes up with these ideas, but they're phenomenal. And we had a wonderful time writing this book. And like Tosca said, it comes out tomorrow, so we'll see how it does.
And tell us a little bit about Death of the Black Widow. Can you give us a synopsis, an overview?
Yeah, it essentially starts off with a police rookie. It's his very first day on the job, and he's in Detroit, which is a pretty nasty city. And he gets called to an apartment complex for a noise disturbance with his partner. There's screaming going on in an apartment right upstairs. So him and his partner go up there. They have to break the door in because nobody answers. They find a man dead on the floor, bludgeoned to death, and a girl who was, obviously attached. She was handcuffed to the sink in the bathroom, but her handcuffs have been picked, and she's free. So it's very clear that she killed somebody who was keeping her hostage or holding on to her. Our rookie has to transport her to the hospital, volunteers to do that, and she escapes from his car. And this all happens on his very first night as a police officer. So for the book spans probably about 30 or 40 years. It covers his entire police career. And this is one of those incidents that just sticks with him. His very first night, he's supposed to just transport a girl to the hospital, a potential murderer, even if it was self-defense, they never actually get a chance to get her statement and she vanishes on him. So his cop buddies kind of rib him about that. But he becomes obsessed with this girl, and she keeps popping back into his life. Every couple of years, there's another murder, there's another this, another that. And he somehow ties it to her. She shows back up and he thinks that it's her, but he can never actually prove it. And this goes on throughout his entire career until a final conflict at the end of the story. So it was a lot of fun to write because most of my novels tend to span very short amounts of time, 1 or 2 or 3 days. And when you write a book that spans, a time frame like this, we'll go from, the character being 22 years old and now all of a sudden he's 34. You have to account for all that missing time. But in James Patterson's world, he's not going to allow me to go in there and write a, 2-3 paragraph recap of what happened over that time frame. I have to seed it into that, chapter and keep that story moving forward. So it's tricky, but it was fun. I love a challenge, and that's one of the reasons why I agreed to do it.
All right, wonderful. And we have questions. I have questions, but we will round back on those. So thank you, JD. We're moving on to Erica. Erica. So Erica's star of Erica's Girl in Ice is Val Chesterfield, and Val loves vodka on the rocks. So here we are, and this is vodka as far as you know. So, all right. Erica, she also enjoys macaroni and cheese with a side of caribou as well. So, and I think that we will know more about that when we understand the setting of the book. So, Erica, are you comfortable reading a couple pages? Now, I understand there are people who feel like, yes, I can read the book for myself, but I also, I used to really enjoy hearing authors read their work. It's almost like something you don't hear very much anymore. So it's up to you, Erica, if you would like to read a couple pages.
Sure. I think it's all a matter of scale, Tosca. I think when we sit there and we perhaps see an author doing their best, but they don't look up from their work and they read for 20 minutes and you just want to, totally kill yourself. So, it's kind of like, okay, there's one thing there. So, but JD, I totally understand where you're coming from. So let me talk a little bit about, talk about the book.
Tell us about the book. Give us the setting and.
Absolutely. Can I explain the food first really quickly?
Yes, please.
Yeah. So why vodka? Why mac and cheese at the side of caribou, you may ask, because so Val has a pretty severe anxiety disorder. She's kind of dependent on pills and booze, at least in the beginning of the book. And she goes to this extremely remote climate research station off the coast of Greenland, where they're basically living on reconstituted food and local game. So hence the macaroni and cheese and the caribou. But so I'll just tell you a little bit about what the book is about. I'm going to read a very, very short piece from it. So Girl in Ice is about an American linguist named Val, who is tasked to travel to an extremely remote climate research center off the coast of Greenland, where a girl has thawed from a glacier alive, speaking a language no one understands. Now, 8 months before the novel begins, Val's twin brother, Andy, who was a climate researcher out in this extremely remote station, walks out middle of the night, 50 degrees below zero, and freezes to death. When the story opens, Val gets an email from Wyatt, one of the other researchers at this remote place when Andy walked out, telling her about the girl, telling her that they found the girl and that Val is basically the only person he can think of who might be able to understand what this girl is talking about. And she's a traumatized kid, and they don't know what she's saying. So she gets the email. She considers deleting it because she only is comfortable and her comfort zone is very narrow. It's her home and her place of work. But she there's a clip of the girl speaking on the email. She plays it and she doesn't understand a thing the girl is saying, but she hears trauma and she hears fear, and she cannot unhear this girl. She cannot unhear this sort of cry for help. So she gets herself together and goes to Greenland. So there are the mystery elements, what happened to the brother? How did he die? Did he kill himself, or what happened up there? The mystery elements, and there's the thriller elements, also mystery of the girl. Who is she? Why is she there? What language is she speaking? What is her story? On the thriller elements, it's almost like a closed door mystery, I guess it's called, because again, Val's not sure whether there was foul play regarding her brother. So the very short piece after a sip of water I'm going to read is, excuse me. So another person who is up in this very remote climate research center, her name is Jean. She's an older woman. She's sort of the grunt up there. She's the mechanic. She's the cook. She does everything anybody else doesn't want to do. And she has her own past, of course. She lost her daughter and her husband in a car crash, and her working at this remote place. A lot of this story is about how we deal with grief. So her presence up there is, for her own reasons. So the piece I'm going to read is Jean is describing what it's like when the girl is thawing. So the girl is thawing out. So Jean says, she's talking to Val. She's talking to, our heroine, Val. Her skin was so cold, but not hard anymore. It was softening by the minute. But we had to give her time because, things thaw from the outside in. So we were patient. But soon we checked her breathing or her pulse, and of course there was nothing, so I was getting nervous. I couldn't believe we were disrespecting a body like this, a body that had been at peace in the ice. What were we going to do now? If she was dead, and it sure looked like it, how would we bury her in the frozen ground? Then her left hand twitched under the blanket. We both yelped and jumped back. After a while, I thought we both imagined it, but then her jaw dropped and her mouth opened and closed. We checked for a heartbeat, nothing. So boom, right away, White was on her with the defibrillator. Just about bounced her off the table, she's so small. But he did it again and nothing, she wasn't breathing. Her eyes still glazed over, both her hands still, like what we'd seen was just some side effect of a body thawing. And I begged him to stop, but he wouldn't. I begged him in Frances's honor. Frances was my daughter. To stop. I said, Wyatt, maybe this is some rigor mortis thing setting in. Just leave her be. Must have been the 10th try. Something changed. You could feel it in the room. This crackling energy filled it up. Wyatt was looking down at her, smiling. From where I sat, I saw her hand shoot up, sort of smack his arm, and I screamed and jumped and ran over. The girl was coughing, gagging, threw up all over the floor, but she was breathing. She was breathing. Wyatt, he was spattered with puke, but he had this look of rapture, like he was in his own kind of church. Standing next to him like that, watching her try to catch her breath, this little filthy naked child, hair in knots. I felt like, in a weird way, we were her parents. Or her second set of parents. You know what I'm saying? He started her little heart, but we worked together to bring her out of the ice, to bring her alive. Think about that. So that's all I'm going to read. And just quickly, you may be asking yourself, where did I get this story, right? I was walking behind my house. I live in the Northeast in the winter of 2017, and I was walking by a frozen pond and I saw 3 juvenile painted turtles frozen. And they didn't look alive, but they didn't look dead either. So I ran home and I Googled it, and it turns out there's all these creatures that can freeze and thaw out alive. Certain wood frogs, even alligators. But of course, we can't do it because we don't possess the cryoprotein necessary. They possess a cryoprotein that protects the cells. When you have water and it freezes, it creates ice, which is jagged, so that will destroy the cells. So there was, but anyway, it came back. It had a sort of vision, really, of a girl in a glacier, and I could just see her foot, and she was running from something. So my job from then on was to create, who was this girl? What was her story? And it became more and more kind of, I had to go back and figure out who she was and why she was there. And then just quickly, one more thing. I think that this book was so much fun for me because it was the culmination of, I call it my 5 fascinations. It was this thing that that witnessed one winter morning. It's an obsession with writing on the knife edge between what is real and what is not real, science and language, and Arctic settings.
Mhm.
So I just decided I'm going to write a book that is just, super fun for myself, and hopefully that will translate to being a real piece of entertainment for the reader, which is always my goal. We're creating entertainment in the
That's
end,
right.
which is a very
Absolutely.
profound thing when you think about it.
Absolutely, especially
Sounds
coming
easy, right?
through a
It's not.
pandemic.
Yeah, exactly.
All right, thank you, Erica. I have
Sure.
more questions to ask,
Okay.
but I'm going to move on for the moment to Grace.
Great.
So Grace
Hello.
shares hi Grace. Grace shares a favorite drink with a character named Daniel from her book. And the drink is, and Daniel's a pre-med student, as good at picking locks as he is at suturing. So, and that drink is a Taro Milk Tea. And it's am I saying Taro right? Taro.
Yep.
Yeah. Okay. Taro Milk Tea. So it's a mixture of taro powder, green tea, sweetened condensed milk, and milk. And we've included a recipe on the Rogue Reads page. Though Grace admits that she and Daniel are both as likely to simply visit their local boba shop. And if you're not sure what boba tea is, Grace, tell us what boba tea is.
So it is basically milk tea with these little pearls inside that are very chewy and a little bit sweet. And one of my favorite drinks to have while writing or doing anything else.
I think it's is it tapioca that makes
Mhm.
the tapioca? So I do not have the taro tea because we do have a fantastic Asian store that would have it, but it's an hour away. But Grace's other favorite snack is white cheddar popcorn. So I live in Nebraska. We have a lot of popcorn. So, all right, Grace, I want to hear about Portrait of a Thief. Will you tell us a little bit about it? And then would you like to read a couple pages?
Yeah, that sounds perfect. So Portrait of a Thief is an Asian American heist novel inspired by the true story of Chinese art disappearing from museums around the world. But in my book, it's featuring Chinese American college students who go on a series of heists to steal back this looted art. So I had a bunch of fun writing it. It combines my love for heist movies and also my thoughts about what it's like to be toward the end of college in your early 20s and dealing with all the feelings that surround that. And I can read just from the very beginning of the book that sets us up with one of our 5 main characters. State your name for the record, please. This was how things began. Boston on the cusp of fall, the Sackler Museum robbed of 23 pieces of priceless Chinese art. Even in the museum's back room, dusk catching the slant of golden late afternoon light, Will could hear the sirens. They sounded like a promise. Will Chen. And what were you doing at the Sackler Museum, Mr. Chen? I work here part-time. I'm an art history student at Harvard. Did you see anything unusual before the theft? No. Describe what you saw during the incident. Any distinguishing features of the thieves, anything the security cameras might not have caught. It all happened very fast. I looked up from my essay and the alarms were going off. When I ran into the gallery, they were already leaving. They had on ski masks, black clothes. He hesitated just for a moment. I think they were speaking Chinese. For a moment, the only sound was the scratch of the detective's pen against his notepad. I see. Do you speak Chinese, Mr. Chen? Yes, does it matter? I couldn't really make out what they were saying. The alarms were going off at that point. Of course. And do you know what they stole? Will thought back to the empty room. If he closed his eyes, he could fit the pieces back where they were supposed to go. A pair of jade tigers, a dragon vase, a jade cup with 3 crested bronze birds mid-flight. Not really. I've been gone all summer. The detective slid a sheet of paper across the table. Can you read the title of this for me? It was a printout from the Harvard Crimson from late August. Will swallowed hard. What is ours is not ours. Chinese art and Western imperialism. Did you write this? Yes. The detective leaned forward, his fingertips touching. Tell me if this sounds suspicious to you. A Chinese student writes an article about looted art, and a few weeks later, Harvard's largest collection of Asian art is robbed. All the priceless pieces mentioned in the article, gone. Will leaned back in his chair. The golden light made everything feel like a painting, and he let his mind drift for a moment, thinking of the paper on Renaissance art that was due next week, the sculpture he still had to finish for his portfolio. Not particularly. And why is that? I was born in the US, detective. We'll look for a badge, a name. Myers. Detective Myers. I'm Chinese American, Will said, lingering on the American. He adjusted the rolled up cuff of his button down, imagining how his sister would handle the situation. You said I was Chinese, but I was born and raised in the US, just like you, and I work part-time at the Sackler. And 3 weeks ago, the Crimson published a paper I wrote for an art history class at Harvard. Last time I checked, none of those are crimes. Now, if you'll excuse me, I have homework to do. This is procedure, Mr. Chen. I just have a few more questions, if you will. Will rose. It might have been a small thing to be called Chinese instead of Chinese American, to have this detective who spoke in a Boston accent look at him as if this place, this museum, this art didn't belong to him. But it didn't feel like a small thing. Not when he was at Harvard, this place of dreams, and he was so close to everything he had ever wanted. It was his senior year, and the whole world felt on the verge of cracking open. I've told you everything I know, he said, and I know my rights. Next time you want to accuse me of something, go through my lawyer. In Eliot House, with his window open to the warm evening air and the distant sound of chatter in the courtyard, Will took a single jade tiger out of his pocket. And that's all from me.
I love it. Dun, dun, dun. All right. So, and let me just reiterate that this is inspired by a true story about Chinese art going missing, except that in real life, they don't know who has been stealing these art pieces.
Yes. So it's an ongoing mystery. It began several years ago. Chinese art was getting stolen from all these museums around the world. And interestingly enough, all the pieces of art had originally been looted from China. And so there's a bunch of speculation about who may be behind it. No one actually knows. And then I thought it'd be a lot of fun if the thieves weren't expert criminals, but Chinese American college students who were trying to balance art crime with studying for midterms and, graduating college.
Love it. Love it. And I have more questions to come. But for now, thank you, Grace. I'm going to go back to Alex. Alex, I have a question. You have gone from serial killers to crime-fighting canines. I'd love to hear a little bit about that evolution and a little bit about your research, and also a little bit, I had mentioned the bond between the handler and the dog, and how even during, I think during the book, that writer is willing to put his own life at risk for his dog. So would you be able to talk a little bit to that bond and tell us a little more about that as well?
Sure. The first series that I wrote, I think there were 12 books in the Maggie Odell series, and she was an FBI profiler. And I kind of came accidentally into that. The book that I wrote, A Perfect Evil, that was my debut. It was a serial killer, actually here in Nebraska, and based on a real life crime on the John Joubert murders back in the early 80s. And I kind of accidentally became a novelist of a series, and I had never ever even read series before. And here I was stuck with this FBI profiler who I didn't really know too much about. I wasn't in law enforcement. I did have a personal connection to the murder cases. I worked for a series of newspapers when John Joubert murdered 2 little boys here in Nebraska. And so I had that connection, and I remembered how frightening it was to go back and forth to work when he was still on the loose, and parents walking their kids to and from school, getting off work early just so they could meet their kids to at the school crossings and pick them up and walk them home. It happened in neighborhoods outside of Omaha that are suburbs of Omaha, where people didn't normally even lock their doors if they just went to the grocery store in the middle of the afternoon. And all of a sudden, everybody was not just locking their door, but bolting their doors. It was a very scary time. And when I decided to write a novel, I decided that I wanted to write about how something like that kind of takes over a whole community. And that's what I thought I had written. And shortly after the book came out, there was a reviewer who called me the newest serial killer lady. And my publishers loved the idea of an FBI profiler, loved the idea of serial killers. And all of a sudden, the second book that I handed in, they rejected. They wanted another Maggie O'Dell novel. And so I found myself writing this series that I sort of accidentally came into, and learning everything from law enforcement to serial killers to crimes to evidence to motives, literally by the seat of my pants. I met some fantastic law enforcement people along the way who offered their help. There were a couple of people who worked that original case that even came to me and said, if you ever need anything, here's my number, here's my email address. So I kind of built up this whole Rolodex. Well, I'm aging myself, but I built up this whole database of people who I could literally call and say, hey, I've got a serial killer who is taking the organs of people. How big is a human kidney? And somebody came back and said, well, it's about such and such for a male, such and such for a female, and it would fit nicely in a sandwich box. So the size of a sandwich container, because they already knew what I was going to do with it. But at the same time, I felt like, I was really getting to know Maggie as I was writing the series. And it gets exhausting after a while. So in the last Maggie O'Dell novel, Stranded, I had this canine handler, Ryder Creed, and his little dog Grace come work on a case with Maggie O'Dell. And I loved those two characters. I just loved them so much that I decided that I really needed to do something extra with those. And authors who have been in the business for a while know, I don't think readers realize that sometimes when you change publishing houses, when you change editors, that you don't really get to choose whether your character gets to survive. And I was at a point in my career that my editor, who loved Maggie O'Dell, had to retire for health purposes. And I came to the end of my contract and I said to my agent, what's next? Because we know that we're probably not going to stay at Doubleday. I was at Doubleday at the time. What's next? And I came up with this idea of Ryder Creed. And I came up with a proposal and literally like 3 or 4 chapters. And he took it out wide, ended up taking it to auction, and we actually had 4 publishers who wanted it, and they didn't care that I was bringing Maggie O'Dell along too. And I did that because I didn't want to leave the old girl behind, but I also know that my readers love this character, and I wanted to bring them along on this new journey. But the best thing about Ryder Creed was that here was a character that I knew, that I understood. And I love dogs ever since I was, big enough to crawl after them. And so I figured that I really had kind of a leg up on this series, and I was excited about it. I was excited to let readers know about all the different things that dogs can scent. And I'm still learning. I'm learning every single time I have a new novel. I try to find new and different things, from medical to cadavers to explosives to drugs that the dogs can find. And the thing about the handlers and Ryder Creed being a Marine, in the Marines, the dogs are actually given a higher rank than their handler. And so they respect that, and they take care of those dogs. And I don't think that there is a handler who has been in any of the military, whether it's Marines, Air Force, Army, whatever, that wouldn't say that they wouldn't protect their dog from. In fact, there's a British soldier that just recently was awarded, I don't know what award they give them, but he ran into the bullets flying in Afghanistan to rescue his dog, who had been wounded and fallen. So it's not unusual for them to just consider that. And Ryder Creed is a character who would be so comfortable to just live in the company of dogs. He doesn't really need people. So it's not unusual for him at all to consider that's his family. And he would definitely put his life on the line for any one of his dogs.
Thank you, Alex. I thought that was fascinating that the dogs are given a higher rank in the military. So thank you so much for that. All right, well, I'm going to move on. The hour is going by quickly. Our time is going by quickly. JD, I think I read that you grew up in a house without a TV. Is that correct?
That is true. Not that I miss much, because this was the 70s and they only had 3 channels back then.
Right.
But yeah, my parents were, my dad could care less about TV, and my mom was adamantly against it, which was a good thing. I mean, we started going to the library from my earliest memory. I was reading by the time I was 3. I had read all the Hardy Boys and Nancy Drews by the time I started kindergarten, and I had no idea what kind of leg up that would give me until, I started getting into, a little further on. But it just, created this love in me for books, and my sister and I, she's 15 months younger than me, so we were relatively close. We just loved going to the library and just hanging out there. And, books to me, it's like a movie that plays out in your mind with an unlimited budget. It can take you any place you want to go. You meet all these interesting people. It's just, there's no other way to explain it. And then I walk into a library or a bookstore and, literally see thousands of those, it still gets me excited.
And yet your parents, I think, were not super gung-ho on the writing idea at one time. Is that correct?
Not at all. It's funny because, I used to write stories for I created a library in my bedroom, and I would write these stories on paper and staple them, and my sister would check them out, and I would charge her late fees. And, so I've been writing stories for my entire life, as long as I can remember. But when I told my parents that I wanted to become an author, they said, well, why don't you go to college, get an actual degree in something? This can be a nice hobby on the side. And, so that's basically what I did. I have a degree in business, another one in finance, and I got halfway through a psychology degree. In my last real job, I was a chief compliance officer for a brokerage firm, which is as horrible as it sounds. But I did that for 2 decades, and I literally got trapped because, I had a really nice salary. It was $250,000 a year plus bonuses. So we had a big old house in Florida. We had cars, we had a boat, so you kind of get caught in that lifestyle and you can't just walk away from it. I was doing the book doctor and ghostwriter thing on the side. I would basically come home and I would work on books to keep myself sane because it was something I enjoyed doing. So I would do that at night, and I had the 6 different books that hit the New York Times list. That 6th one hit, and my wife pulled me aside and she said, I know you really want to be an author. Let's figure out a way to make this work. And my wife is way more daring than I am. She came up with this crazy plan. We sold absolutely everything we owned. We bought a duplex in Pittsburgh, rented out one side to some tenants. We lived in the other side, quit the day job, and basically looked at the bank account one day, and she showed it to me. I remember sitting at the kitchen table. She said, okay, it looks like you've got about 18 months to make this writer thing work. Go. And when you put your feet to the coals like that, you don't really have a choice. And part of me wishes I would have done it earlier in life, because I was in my mid-40s when all this stuff played out. But at the same time, all that experience I garnered, working as a book doctor and a ghostwriter, I think that's what shaped my writing style today. So I don't think I would be where I am as a writer if I hadn't have done that. So I wouldn't change anything, but that's how it all played out.
You have an awesome wife.
She's fantastic.
Just quickly, can you tell us about how your connection with Needful Things and Stephen King came about? A little bit about that.
Yeah, so my life is, my professional career is like a series of like lightning striking and getting caught in, like I captured lightning in a bottle, I guess is the easiest way to phrase it. So I wrote my first novel. It's a horror story called Forsaken. And in the book, I had to explain where the wife buys a journal. And just to get to that last page and get it down on paper, because it's just important to get it all done, I wrote that she walked into Needful Things and bought it there. And I fully expected to have to change that, because you can't just do that sort of thing and get away with it. But my wife, again, way smarter than me, she read it and she said, no, let's just get King's permission to use it. I said, well, how do you do that? Turns out he's got a house in Florida that's about 10 minutes from my mom's house. So we printed up the manuscript, hopped in the car, and figured, well, we'll go over to Steve's house. He's probably outside gardening or doing something. I'll hand him off the manuscript. He'll give me a big thumbs up, and we'll be on our way. It didn't quite work out that way. So King's house in Florida, he lives on a key, which is basically an island off the coast. And you go over like it's a one-lane bridge that actually turns in the middle to let boats go by. And if you make a left, you go to the public portion of this island where the beaches and the bars and restaurants and stuff are. And if you make a right, you basically go to the entire half of this island that King owns. There's immediately a private drive sign, a no trespassing sign. We got about a half mile in and there was a gate and another gate. And I'm driving like this, looking up in the trees, watching for snipers, thinking this is probably a bad idea. So we turned around, went to a restaurant, and I called a friend of mine. His name was Dallas Mayer. He passed away a few years ago, but he was a real good friend of King's. He wrote under the name Jack Ketchum. And I told him what we were doing. He said, oh yeah, don't stalk Steve. He hates that. Here's his email address. Just send him the book. If he likes it, you'll hear back from him. If the book's shit, he probably won't respond. So I sent off the book, and 2 days later, I got an email back from King, and he said, I love it. Go ahead and use the reference. If you need anything from me, let me know. And I stared at that for about 4 days, waiting for him to send some kind of retraction, like, I meant that for Grisham, not you, sorry. But he turned out to be for real on that. And he followed through. And I mean, even to the point where Publishers Weekly, when they reviewed the book, they tore it apart because I had all these King references in there, and they felt that I used them without authorization. He actually picked up the phone, spoke to somebody at Publishers Weekly, and got them to adjust the review. Because he obviously did, so that's the kind of guy that he is. I mean, really, he understands what it's like to be that aspiring author, and he's never forgotten that. So, yeah, so that is basically how I got my career started.
I love that. Don't stalk Steve. He hates that.
He hates that.
He hates that. That's awesome. Thank you, JD. I'm going to move on to Erica. Erica, I've got questions. You have taken some amazing journeys from the wilderness. You spent weeks in the wilderness in Maine, and you went up the Amazon River, or down maybe up.
Kind of across.
Down. Into the Peruvian jungle.
Mm-hmm.
And you've also gone to, I mean, every place you write about, you go to. And you spend weeks there, correct? And
Yes.
and then you were in Greenland as well. And I've seen some of your pictures online when I was researching. And was there ever a moment in any of these trips where you just thought, I feel like this was probably not a safe choice, or maybe I don't make it out of this one? Did you ever have a moment where you thought, well, I don't know, this could go either way?
Well, first, let me say that the trips that I take are not, so the story always comes first. But the 3 books that have been published now, the setting is so important that I feel like I must get it right. So I write a first draft, and then I go ahead and do the trip. I was kind of scared shitless different times on all trips. I mean, the first trip was to research the river at night. I went to the Allagash territory in northern Maine because, the story is about 4 women friends who go whitewater rafting in northern Maine, lose the raft, and have to survive not only the wilderness, but a mother and son who have disappeared themselves for their own tragic reasons. So kind of Deliverance with chicks kind of feeling. But I wanted to find out, who are these people that disappear themselves? Why do they do it? Who are they? And so anyway, long story short, it was very difficult to find these people. They disappear. They want to be left alone. I just had some scary situations. I met a guy, he would only meet me on some random highway. He was on horseback, and in order to talk to him, I had to get on the horseback with him and go to his home, which is a half mile in the woods in the winter. I vetted everyone because, you know, I want to live, and I had my mace and so on. In the jungle, there was a time when we were really, really deep in the jungle, and my guide was amazing. He was so amazing that he could hear with his feet. By that, I mean, he knew that there was a very large herd of white-lipped peccary, which is a very kind of aggressive hog, large, stupid, and they just run and run, and they don't care what they run over. And one day I never heard, and he said we were in the middle of the jungle, and he said they're coming, and we only have about a minute to find shelter. So he could tell that they were coming, and so we found shelter in the sort of root system of this massive tree. But he needed to know what direction they were coming. I was like, well, if we don't find shelter, they're just gonna, you know, run us over. So that was something. And then in Greenland, I guess there's a place called the Iceberg Graveyard, and that's a fjord, which is an inlet, very long, narrow inlet, and it's so called the Iceberg Graveyard because the ocean currents wash in these massive bergs. They're like, you know, 10 stories tall, if you can imagine it, and blocks long. And we're all the time hearing crashing and, you know, muffled gunshots, and it's ice breaking. And I asked our guide, like, well, what do we do if one of these big ones breaks? And he just says, we're in kayaks. And he just said, turn your kayak toward the sound, you know, because if it breaks, a massive wave is created and you will breach. So he didn't say you're going to live. He just said, turn your kayak toward the sound, and there's a better chance.
He didn't make any promises.
Right. There's a better chance you'll be okay. But you know, I'm not complaining about any of these trips. It was a great privilege to go, and a wonderful experience, and it added to the richness of the story. It validated so many concepts that I had only read about. And I mean, before I go on any of these trips, I read everything I can get my hands on. I interview everyone I can. But these trips really have helped bring the story to the reader, which is my number one joy, you know, to make it more alive.
Absolutely.
Yeah, have you get out of your head for a few hours. That's why we do all this, right?
That's why we do it. All right, Erica, off the top of your head, just one non-negotiable travel item.
Plastic bags, because
Plastic bags?
I don't know, you just never know when something is wet. You know?
That's a good one. That's
just
true,
like
actually.
Little ones and larger ones, like just plastic bags.
Plastic bags.
Organize clear to see what's in there. Yeah.
I love it. Thank you very much.
You're welcome.
Grace.
Hello.
I have two questions I need to ask you. One is, what is your time management secret? Because you wrote this in the middle of med school.
We all want to know.
we all need to know. What are you doing? Do you sleep? And what supplements are you taking? Any special things we need to know here? Because I feel like there are.
Oh my gosh. So the big thing for me is I live on my Google Calendar. So everything is scheduled all the time. If something is not on there, then it does not get done, unfortunately. So that's the main thing. But really, I don't know. I feel so lucky to be here with all of these established authors, and I feel so early on in my career that I think mostly I am just learning about everything that goes into both publishing and medicine and trying to balance the two.
I was speaking with my friend Lydia Kang, who is a Nebraska author. She's a physician at UNMC, University of Nebraska Medical Center, but she also writes fiction as well. And I was like, you got to check out this book. And she said, I'm so impressed that Grace is writing this in the middle of medical school. So from one doctor to another. And then I want to ask you, Portrait of a Thief is an exploration of identity. And in this case of inhabiting the identity of being Chinese American, or feeling a lack of connection to one's ancestry. And I was just wondering if you could speak a little bit about this from the Chinese American perspective, and how does that come up in life, and how was this book personal to you with that?
Yeah, I love that question because I think for me, in terms of this story, I really think of it as an identity story disguised as a heist story, because the main thing in writing these characters and coming up with them was thinking about my own experiences growing up. And, I think like many children of immigrants, I often felt like I could never be American enough for America. I would get questions about where I was from or compliments on my English. But then when I would visit my family in China, I would get what I now know were very well-meaning questions about whether I could speak Chinese or whether I could use chopsticks. And all these conversations were happening in Chinese. And so I was like, yes, I've been talking to you. I can understand. And so it took me, I think, several years to get comfortable with my own identity and feel like being Chinese American, I could inhabit both cultures as opposed to not really feeling enough for either. And so I wanted to take these characters who all have different experiences of being Chinese American and kind of examine the reasons why they would say yes to something like as reckless and as dangerous as a heist, but also, what it would mean to these children of the diaspora to return art that had originally been looted in China back home to a country that they are both familiar with, but still feels kind of new to them.
Mm-hmm. Thank you for answering that. As someone I'm biracial, I'm half Korean. That's something I still also identify with. These questions of, are you American enough? Are you Asian enough? Are you, and same questions from my family too. Can you use chopsticks? So same thing. All right. Well, we are going over our time. I do know that we've had a couple questions. I don't know if we can round robin them real quick or if we can put them out there real fast. Chris, how are we doing? I know we had to
unmute myself. Sorry.
Oh, sorry.
We do have one question that I would love to have everybody answer that came from Facebook. Colleen Ballou McChesney asked, are the favorite food and drinks of your character your favorites, or are they not your favorites, but chosen to make your character more interesting?
Anyone?
I kind of cheated and gave you my favorite drink, so.
Mine are definitely my character's favorites because they're kind of boring.
Oh, mine are my character's favorites. And, the food is a function of where she is. She's isolated, in this extremely remote place, and there's only what's there to eat. So
I have 5 main characters. And so just by chance, I think one of them gets to have my favorite foods and drinks too.
I love it. I think we also had one question on would you recommend self-publishing for first-time authors? That was one that came up. And I know we've got some authors who do both. We've got some hybrid authors here. Just real quick off the cuff thoughts.
I'll weigh in on it. I mean, I've got a fantastic agent. Her name's Kristen Nelson. She's out of Colorado instead of New York. So just different all around. She sold, if you're familiar with Hugh Howey in the Wool series, she actually sold that, but he was able to retain his ebook rights, but she sold print. With my books, what we tend to do is we get offers. I'm kind of a free agent. I don't sign a contract for more than 2 books. And when it comes time to sell something, we basically look at those offers and decide whether it's going to be make more sense to go the traditional route or the indie route. And she sells everything a la carte, so she doesn't give anybody world rights. She sells like English, the various languages all separately, audiobooks separately. She breaks it all out into those different pieces, and basically once she's done with it, I turn it over to my team, and anything that she didn't sell in the traditional world, we publish independently. That's how I'm able to do 150 different countries and all these different languages. From a financial standpoint, it makes a huge amount of sense because, traditionally you're lucky if you get 25 cents on the dollar. As an indie author, you get 70%, so 70 cents on the dollar. But you don't get the exposure that you would get on the traditional side. So if you can mix it up, basically what I'm doing, it allows you to kind of, keep a foot in both camps and take advantage of both of those worlds. And I've seen it play out. I've got 7 different projects right now in what I call Hollywood hell, various different stages. Several of those are indie published titles. And, going back a couple of years, you wouldn't even be able to talk to people in California if it was an indie published title. And I just had a call 2 days ago and the question didn't even come up anymore. They just don't care. As long as you do it properly, that's always been my big thing. My books, whether they go indie or they go traditional, they go through the same ringer. They go through the same editors, the same publishing process. That book is no different coming out as an indie title as it would be if it came out of Penguin Random House. And I make sure of that with every one of those titles. Indie publishing should never be a plan B. So if you've got a novel that you've written and you send it out to agents and you're getting rejection after rejection, or publishers don't want it, there's probably a reason. And it's difficult to realize that and face that. But if it's getting that kind of rejection, you need to take a step back, look at it as a product, because in the end, that's what it really is, and try and figure out if they're right. And most likely they are, and see if you can fix that. The only time you should ever really choose indie publishing is if you could publish it traditionally, but it makes more sense to go indie because of timing. You can control your own dates, your publication dates. Different things like that, financial reasons. I don't necessarily need a big advance anymore. So it's more about, where they're going to send me on book tours. Am I going to be able to get in front of new groups, expand my audience? Those are the things that, that would cause me to go traditional over indie. But it's very 50-50. And you have to find an agent that's willing to do that. A lot of agents still won't do that, but I think they're coming around.
Yeah, I have 16 books that are traditionally published, and I'm indie now. And I've done, 5 books now independently published. And I would agree with everything that JD said. It's a very viable option, but it is a lot of work. And it does give you a lot of freedom and a lot of independence. I mean, I love being able to finally have a say over my covers and really make sure that they're the best, and they really support what the novel is about. But you really do have to have a crew that you trust. Again, like with the editors and everything that JD just said, that it's, you have to make it the best that you possibly can. And it does take a lot of work. I'm very fortunate because I have such a loyal reader fan base that has followed me for 21 books, and I couldn't do this without them. I can't imagine starting from ground zero as an independent, because traditional publishing did bring me a huge audience that I still have. And I still use traditional publishers and my agent for all of my foreign, which I'm not willing yet to kind of do all of that on my own. But I think it is a very viable option that if you feel like you've got something that you love, you want to make this a career, and you think that you can put together a crew that will do what you need to do. But it's not for the faint of heart at all. It is a lot of work, and it does take a lot, but it can be very rewarding, and it can be it can give you a lot of freedom to write what you want to write too.
Thank you, you guys. I see we've got a raised hand. Is that Stacy?
Hold on.
Okay.
I asked her to unmute, but she did not. So,
Okay.
Stacy.
I don't know. Now I've lost her. Oh, there she is. Asked to unmute. Let's try it again. Stacy, can you unmute?
Do you have a question?
You're on.
Oh no, I'm okay.
You don't have a question?
No, I was just saying that I've read Alex Kava and JD Barker, and they both have great books. And I wish that Alex Kava would have more of Maggie Odell series.
Mm-hmm. Okay. I have a question that I wanted to ask. I have two questions I wanted to ask. One is of Grace Lee. Why did you choose a male protagonist instead of, I mean, often people choose the protagonist of the gender that they relate to the most, or that they can relate through easily. So why did you go with the male protagonist?
Yeah, I find it's so interesting because I've gotten asked that a couple times, but I never thought of it as choosing a male protagonist because there are 5 characters in the book and 3 of the 5 are women. But the story does start and end with Will because I wanted to kind of deconstruct this idea of like the perfect Asian American child. And so he's, an oldest son, he's at Harvard, he's doing everything that he's supposed to be doing. He's his parents' American dream. And yet he's, about to graduate college and still feeling kind of unfulfilled, adrift in his life. And so I wanted to think about how often, especially for immigrants and children of immigrants, we have this idea of success and achievement, and it's not necessarily tied to happiness and personal fulfillment.
Thank you. And then I have a question for JD. Why you were so successful as your own by your own right, with your own writing in your own name, and now the last 3 novels have been with James Patterson. Are you going to be writing any more standalones or JD Barker books that are not tied to the Patterson?
Yeah, and some of them are actually done. That's part of the problem with the traditional world is I've got zero control over that publication schedule. You kind of turn in that book and it ends up on the assembly line and you really don't get any say in it. So a lot of this has had to do with timing that's totally out of my control. From my standpoint, I've been writing one JD Barker book, one book with Patterson or somebody else, another JD Barker book, and bouncing back and forth. They haven't all come out that way. I honestly love writing with other authors. It recharges my batteries. It takes the stories in directions that I wouldn't normally go. And honestly, there's selfish reasons. I mean, he's the #1 selling author in the world, and I've got his home phone number and his cell number, and he tells me when I'm doing wrong. You can't. I can't pass up on that kind of education when he's willing to hand that out. So if he wants to work with me, I'll continue doing it. We've got a really weird relationship because I write horror and I write suspense. He likes that. So I'm kind of his go-to guy for scary stuff. So a lot of these projects, he gets an idea that just happens to be a little stranger, a little scarier, or it just doesn't fit with any of the other co-authors or things he wants to do on his own, and he calls me up. And it's kind of fun that I actually have my own career because we joke about it. Me and Bill Clinton and Dolly Parton now are the only people that have actually gotten equal billing with James Patterson on his covers. Which is fun. It's in the contract. We have same font size no matter what. There are several countries where I actually outsell them, which is also fun because my name gets to go first. I mailed them copies of all of those for Christmas as a joke because why not? So it's a good time, but I'm going to try and write more and more on my own as my career goes. I've got plenty of ideas. I need to figure out how to get 27 hours in a day.
I don't think JD sleeps either. I mean, because I see your output and I have a quick question for Erica. Erica, where's your next big trip to? Can you tell us, or is that giving away too much?
No, it's not. It's Oregon, and I can't talk too much about the book, but it's a thriller.
Will you be in danger?
I already was a little bit, so that's over. But I decided because I went in November for this one. But it's about nature fighting back, and it's called The Intelligence.
All right.
So that's really all I can say about the next book at this point.
I love these extreme settings. And then we had the question: will there be any more Maggie Odell series books, Alex?
You never know.
You never know. All right.
Well,
thank
I'm
you.
going to the Arctic and Greenland in August. I am so excited. This is Chris.
Hi, Chris.
Chris Goff. We're going, my husband and I are going. We went to Antarctica as the last trip before COVID shut us down.
You went though. You went. That's
Yeah, we
great.
did. Yeah. Kayaked in the Weddell Sea right above where they
Wow.
found the Endurance. It was
That's
so
dream.
fabulous. Yeah, fabulous. So.
Wow. Well, do we have any last comments or questions before we kind of bring this one home? Anyone? We could talk at length all night long. I know that we have had questions that about writing routines and plotter, pantser, and different things like this. And we've heard a little bit about some of this, but we'll just have to save it, I think, for another time. I hope that you will join us next month on May 16th, when Tracy Clark, who is author of the Cass Rains Chicago Mystery Series, the most recent of which is Runner, will be emceeing special guests, Jane Krentz, also known as Amanda Quick, James Rollins, Chris Holm, and Sarah Paretsky. So that is something we're all very excited for and looking forward to. If you choose to post about the Rogue Reads event tonight, please use hashtags Rogue Reads and Rogue Women Writers. Also, if there's something you missed and you want to go back and rewatch it, you can find us on our YouTube channel. Just look up Rogue Women Writers. And you can rewatch that as well. So I want to just give a special thank you to our guests, Alex Kava, JD Barker, Erica Ferencik, and Grace D. Lee. Thank you so much for taking your time to spend it with us. We're so excited about your new novels. We're so excited that we've gotten to take a little bit of your time and hear from you. So thank you once again for joining us tonight.
You're welcome. It was fabulous. Thank you so much.
Thank you, everyone.
Thanks, everybody. Appreciate it.
Congratulations.